Hey, this is Paul Bain. It's GreatDad.com, the website for fathers, because dads don't always think like moms. And if you're just tuning in, Great Dad Talks is a series of weekly conversations with all types of fathers, all with a point of view on modern parenting. And as a life coach specializing in working with new and experienced dads, I'm always interested in talking to modern dads and see how we and they are evolving today. You can find more resources at GreatDad.com and more about my coaching at GreatDad.com/coaching. And today I'm talking to Micah Lorenc, who's also a coach and has a different way of getting to coaching than I do. He's got some different training that we're gonna talk about. He's both an executive and a relationships coach. He's also got some kids, three kids, lives in Austin, Texas. So welcome, Micah.
Thank you, Paul. I'm happy to be here. Excited to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm always interested in hearing different coaching perspectives, especially as they relate to the family. I mean, most of the stuff we hear about coaching is usually around career and executive coaching. So first of all, I'm going to throw that the hardball question I told you about before we got started. You describe yourself as a dropout from the corporate life, which I am too, by the way. And now So how do you say, like, you know, I hated my job so much that I want to tell other people how to do their job. How do you rationalize those two things?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I don't know that I've ever really even put that together. It kind of just became there was a natural flow from my corporate job into my coaching job. And I didn't even see it coming actually at first. Mm-hmm. It was probably 7 years ago that I got exposure to the Clifton Strengths assessment, which mm-hmm. is really a foundational tool that I use in my coaching. And when we took the assessment as a team in my corporate job, it was interesting to see that everybody liked it. Everybody thought it was accurate. They thought it was really interesting. And we shared it with one another. And then we never talked about it again. It was like a one-day thing. And then we never talked about it again. And I was like,
it could have been worse. It could have been the Myers-Briggs, and you would have
talked about it every day. I'm sure we did that the decade before, but this was a new thing. Everybody took it, and I just was looking around like, why aren't we using this tool? And it became, I didn't realize it at the time, but it became this kind of mission of mine to understand how to use it in a practical setting. And I started volunteering my time, facilitating workshops and doing some one-on-one coaching as kind of a side job to my full-time job. So I spent that 7 years in corporate strategy roles. So I was on a strategy team, and then I would get a phone call or an email on the side from time to time from teams within my company that would say, hey, I heard you do this. Will you come facilitate my team through some coaching on their strengths and talking about how we can have better working relationships as a team? And I loved that so much. That's what I talked about with my wife at night. And I would volunteer my time on nights and weekends to have these conversations with people. And I got certified as a certified Gallup-Strengths Coach. And my wife was like, why aren't you doing that instead of strategy? And I loved strategy in the corporate world, but it couldn't hold a candle to the joy and the satisfaction and the reward I was getting from coaching. So that was it became this step I took to really pursue where my passions were. And I still like the business world. I like strategy. And it kind of put me in a position to be a helper more than a doer, a guide more than the actual doer. And I had never even thought about it until you asked that question. So I still love that world, and I like seeing other people have success, but I like the coaching side of that equation. And that's what I've been doing instead. Makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure having that background as you did in Fortune 100 companies gives you a lot of gravitas when you talk to other people going through their own struggles, whether it's work-life balance or just working within. Yeah, I know what it's like.
Yeah,
I definitely, for sure.
So my coaching really I really focus on a values-based approach. So strengths-based coaching is a little bit different. Tell us a little bit more about how the Clifton strengths-based work.
I think that, so it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about values too, because I think any coaching approach has to incorporate values into it, because you can't ignore what people value. It's definitely a fundamental element of any effective coaching. The Clifton Strengths started just as, I think, kind of a research project back at the end of World War II. A man named Don Clifton started doing, I think he was already a psychologist, and he wanted to get into new research. And he thought, I want to focus on what makes people successful. And he started to look around at all of the research at the time and found that most of the psychologists in personal development were doing or publishing what they called deficiency-based development, which was basically like, what's wrong with you and how do we fix it? So find your deficiencies and your weaknesses, address those weaknesses, and then you'll be a more well-rounded person. And Don was like, what if we focused on what's right about people instead of what's wrong with them? And that was kind of the birth of strength psychology. So he was the father of strength psychology, did a bunch of research over the next few decades, just exploring who has been successful, what strengths contributed to their success, and how do we get that on paper? And then they built the assessment that they now offer on Gallup's website for anybody at all to take the assessment and find out, like, what are my natural gifts? What are the things that come naturally to me? Now, to get to your question about values, within the strengths, there's a values element to it. So you and I could take the assessment, and we may have some of the same strengths in our top 10 or in our dominant strengths, but the flavor that it takes for you is going to be aligned to your values, and the flavor that it takes for me will be aligned to my values. And in that sense, anybody who takes the assessment, it's unique to you. Mm-hmm. Even though the words that they use and some of the strengths that are assigned to you through the assessment might be the same as what other people have, it's totally unique to you because you are a unique person, and your strengths show up in you differently than in somebody else because of your values, your cultural background, your language learning, your religion, things like that all contribute to who you are.
Yeah. And to be clear, for those who aren't familiar with strengths-based methodologies, it's not at all like, oh, you're good at math, or, it's not that type of thing. It incorporates soft skills as well within that skill inventory.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Something like there's a strength that people like to talk about. It's kind of a fun one. It's called WOO, and it stands for winning others over. It's the only acronym in all of the strengths. There are 34 that they identified through the research, that all 34 of them have been leveraged for good or have been leveraged for success. Woo is one that just means it's somebody who has social courage. They like interacting in a social environment. They like meeting strangers and getting them to like them and striking up conversations. It's fun for somebody with high woo, if that's a strength. Now, that doesn't mean that they have a monopoly on being likable and being social. Other people can learn the skill of being a networker or being social or being good in a social environment. But for someone with woo, they're naturally talented at it and they love it. It energizes them. Mm-hmm. They don't have to work as hard at it. Yeah. If you don't have high woo, you can still be good at it as a skill, but it's not going to energize you. And it's not going to be something that came as naturally for you. And that's the distinction that I think you were getting at, that strengths isn't necessarily skills.
Yeah, I think it's really important, because I think a lot of us had experience with the Myers-Briggs. We tend to box people into certain identities. And I found it in the corporate setting somewhat destructive within teams rather than enabling. But what I like about the strengths assessments that I've done so far is that idea that, yeah, you can be naturally talented at this, but it doesn't mean that you can't bring out the best of yourself in something that that you are less naturally able to. Right.
Absolutely. And there's also a lot of people have a hard time with this idea of ignoring their weaknesses. Well, I can't just focus on my strengths. That's irresponsible. Right. If I'm not thinking about the things, and I think some of that comes from just, especially in a corporate world, I spent the first 5 or so years of my corporate experience, my development plans that my manager created for me were all weakness based. That was, we're kind of in the habit of looking at what's wrong with us and trying to round ourselves out. The idea behind the strengths-based development is you should definitely be aware of your weaknesses. you can manage those so that they don't get you in trouble and hold you back. But where you put most of your time and your energy and investment is in where you're already naturally good, where you're already naturally talented, so you can bring it to a level of excellence that wouldn't have been possible if you were always worrying about your weaknesses.
Yeah, and that's one of the miraculous things about coaching, is that it helps you find those things that are more natural to you, so that you get ideally into more of an ease and flow, and you go into your job every day.
Yeah.
You're not like dreading it, but thinking like, I get to do this again.
Right.
And for people who have not experienced coaching, that is, when you bring up the fact that you had a manager who would actually take you through your development plans, that doesn't exist anymore in a lot of corporations. There is no development. There is no helping you think through what's going to be good for Micah 5 years down the road. How can we develop him into a better manager? And coaches, I think, are filling in for a lot of people on helping individuals.
That's a really good point.
Helping them figure that out for themselves, because there's nobody doing that for us anymore.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
So recently you've been using some of those skills to do a little bit more in family relationships. So that's my bailiwick. I work a lot with dads, not as much with, or not at all with moms, or in a one-on-one coaching situation. So tell me more about how that has evolved, and where you see the crossover from management coaching to family coaching.
Yeah, that's been such an interesting evolution and progression. As I've been doing a lot of career coaching and leadership coaching with individuals in the corporate world or in a professional and working environment, it's been interesting that as we finish, when they take the assessment, we go through their strengths one by one. Here are your top 10 strengths. We talk about not just what they mean academically, but what they mean for that person. Like, what does this look like in you, and how does that apply to your goals in your career? And almost without fail, these and it's not always men. Oftentimes I work with women too, who are trying to achieve improvements in their career goals. But they'll get through about half of their assessment results with me, and they'll just pause and be like, I got to have my spouse take this, or I've got to have my partner take this assessment. And I'm like, yes, you do. Because this is something that my wife and I both took it a couple of years ago. And as we've talked about what the results mean, it helps you. The assessment gives you language to explain things you already knew about yourself that you didn't really know you had to explain. And that became clear to me when my wife took the assessment, and we would talk about some differences where I had a strength that was really high and that same strength was really low for her, or vice versa. All of a sudden we knew to talk about those things and had the language to explain why it's important to understand somebody else's perspective and how it might be different from yours. Mm-hmm. So I started encouraging these people when they bring it up, people that I'm coaching, they're like, I need my spouse to take this or my partner to take this. I'm like, yes, you do. Let's do it. And so we started having one session or two sessions where they would bring in their partner, and the three of us would talk, and we would have kind of a relationship coaching. And without fail, it translates to parenting. If these are the strengths that you have as a dad, and these are the strengths that you have as a mom, then how do your strengths contribute to your parenting style? And how do your children's strengths relate to your own strengths? And are you looking at the differences between you and your children as an advantage, or are you looking at it as something to be corrected? And sometimes I'll tell you, as a parent, as a dad, there have been times where I looked at differences in my children and thought that I needed to correct it because it wasn't like me.
Yeah.
That's not the way I see the world, or that's not a talent that I have. So I'm going to correct that out of them. And I had to learn.
That's a natural human response.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking though sometimes when I see it after the fact, like, oh, I didn't need to correct that. This is who they are. Yeah. And I need to nurture it and acknowledge that just because it's not me doesn't mean that it's not good.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is a huge challenge for parents, is to have faith that their children are going to be all right. In most cases, they're going to be all right. They're probably not going to follow our same paths, but they're going to be all right. Yeah. So then how do the kids, bringing the kids into it too, are you using your coaching skills with your own kids, or helping other people with their own kids?
So
I've never coached a child before. So
we don't, no, that's a great question. I don't even we don't do a lot of direct coaching with our kids
Yeah.
using the strengths language. My wife and I talk about it all the time, though. We'll reflect and discuss how an interaction could have been better and what might be going on in our children's heads based on what we know about the strengths assessment and the strengths tool. Like I said, it's not a silver bullet.
Right.
But it is an aid. It gives us language to describe what might be going on. So for example, there's a strength called analytical. And the analytical strength is generally people with high analytical, they love facts and data. And they're truth seekers. So they're always looking for evidence. And they want to see why something is true and know that it's true for themselves. And they're less likely to take somebody's word for it. They want to do the research themselves and see the evidence. And it's all about facts and not emotion. Yeah. And so it's an interesting perspective. And I think most of us can think of an adult that we know that's like that. But a couple of weeks ago, my wife had told my son's very much into Star Wars right now. He's 9 years old and he couldn't find his lightsaber. And she had said something like, "Oh, I put your lightsaber on the dresser and so you can play with it later." And he runs out of the room to peek in his bedroom and then comes back.
Verify.
Didn't have the lightsaber. He needed to verify. He needed to know for himself. And at first my wife was like, "Did you not believe me? Like, did you think that I was going to lie to you about what I did with your lightsaber?" And when we talked about it later, we had a more objective conversation about it. It was not personal. He was not trying to hurt your feelings, but as somebody who is an analytical thinker, he just needed to know for himself. And we can let him do that now and not take it personally. So when he goes to verify something that we said, we don't have to get upset with him or be angry or feel like a personal attack, like you didn't believe me, son. Instead, we can be like, "Oh, that's how he thinks. He just needs to verify for himself. He needs to see the evidence for himself." And all of a sudden, it kind of takes the emotion out of it. We can look at that as a positive thing about his personality, not something to be corrected or take personally.
Yeah. That's a huge thing. I mean, I work a lot with positive intelligence, which a lot of it is dealing with your personal saboteurs. And if you allow that other person doing something that for them is completely benign and inside their strengths or their character, and for them it's a great thing, and then you allow that to make you feel less than by allowing all your mind chatter to develop that into a bigger drama. Sometimes all it is wanting to protect the lifesaver.
It's not a big deal.
It's not a big deal.
You can let it go. You can let it go.
Let it go. Exactly.
So I just realized I didn't quite answer your question too. From a kind of logistical standpoint, Gallup, who created this assessment, they created a children's version a few years ago. So they took the adult version is, like I mentioned before, there are 34 total strengths. And they assign them to you in rank order from 1 to 34, but they tell you to focus on your top 10. Those are your dominant strengths. That's kind of your zone of genius. With the children's version, they said that this is for kids that are 10 to 14 years old. So you have to not just be able to read, but kind of understand what questions are being asked and how you would answer those for yourself. So 10 is about the lower limit that they give you for what they call the Strengths Explorer, is the kids version. So 10 to 14 years old is the range that they recommend for the children's version. And instead of 34 total, they only have 10 strengths for the kids. And instead of your top 10, they tell the kids to learn about their top 3. So they have kind of created a version where children 10 and older can understand the strengths and can be coached in a sense by their parents or teachers to understand themselves better and to leverage their strengths in a positive way. But really it's the parents that I work with. We talk about them doing the assessment to know themselves and to learn the strengths well enough that they can start to do what we call strength spotting in their children. And it's just paying attention for behaviors that could be explained by one of the strengths that might be contributing to it. So as a parent, if you understand your strengths and you understand the strengths well enough, you might observe behaviors in your children or spot behaviors in your children that you're like, "Oh, that sounds a lot like this strength. Maybe I need to think about interacting with them differently according to the strength that I'm spotting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense to me, because I think, we're never given a handbook on how to raise kids, and we're all making it up as we go
Wouldn't that
along.
be nice?
And well, we just kind of bumble through. I mean, every interaction with our kids is like, pick up your laundry, why is your bathroom dirty, take out the trash or whatever. And it is just a series of just kind of random interactions. And I don't know if I'm hopeful or realistic about where modern adult, parents are. They don't have time. But giving them a language or a framework or something to make those interactions more valuable and more understanding that builds empathy would just seem like an ideal thing, because it's you're a parent and it's over in a flash. And if I'd want to get regret into here, but if you could have a more optimal relationship with them, it would be more based on understanding them. You start with love, and love should equal empathy, but it's not necessarily the case. I mean, I think it gets confused with the daily routine and all that.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that I love about it too, that kind of puts things into perspective as a parent, is that when you have language like that and you take a strengths-based perspective, you realize that even for the adults, when there are 34 strengths that could be chosen from or selected from to be put in your top 10, like these are really your dominant strengths, that leaves 24 strengths that aren't your top strengths. That's a lot of opportunity for you to accept that I'm not going to be great at everything. Yeah. And it gives you permission to stop comparing yourself to other people. And I think that applies to parenting too. Even within my own children, when my daughter wants to talk about the things that she's not good at because my son is, and my son wants to talk about something that he's not good at that he sees in my daughter, we can have a really productive conversation about comparison by using strengths language and say, look, buddy, you don't realize that this comes really naturally to your sister because she has these strengths. And so she's always going to be good at this kind of thing. And if that's important to you, we can work on building that strength for you, but not if you don't want to. You've got these strengths, right? And you can feel good about yourself in these ways. Stop comparing yourself to your sister. You be you and she'll be her, and both are good.
Yeah. And when you've got 34, it's not like clearly you can't be them all.
You can't be good at everything. Yeah.
You might as well give in on some of them and let it go.
It's one of the most, that was probably one of the most liberating feelings for me, even as an adult, when I think I used to go about my work feeling like I didn't want to be found out. I didn't want people to see me at my weaknesses, in my weaknesses. Yeah. Being self-conscious about things that I wasn't good at. And once I really changed this perspective and had a shift in my mindset using a strengths-based approach, I let go of all those things that I thought I was supposed to be good at that I knew I wasn't. And instead, I started looking to others to support me. And I started looking to others and acknowledging them, like, you're really good at this thing that I suck at. And we can partner, and I can be better with you because of your strengths complementing mine. And I can help you sometimes too because of strengths that I have that you don't. And it's just such a more healthy, mature relationship building tool when you have that perspective.
Yeah. I mean, it really talks to diversity too, why people hire people and they partner with people who are identical to them. Whereas you want to have different skill sets and different strengths, as you say, so that you're not just building on those same ones and dominating and forgetting about all the rest.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. Yeah. It's such a foundation, the diverse mindset, diverse perspectives, that is one of the guiding principles that Gallup wrote. There were 5 guiding principles that came out of this research, and that was one of them, that differences are an advantage. And some people just don't believe that. I do. And what you just said, I can tell you do too. It's like when you truly see differences as an advantage, opportunities for partnership and relationship building and healthy relationships go through the roof. Yeah. But when you don't see differences as truly an advantage, that's where diversity is a problem.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever did in your corporate work. I always had a team building exercise that was the trip to the moon. Did you ever do this one?
No, I don't think so.
You have your whole team to get 8, 10 people, whatever, in your team, and you give them this exercise. They're put on the moon, and they need to rate the things that they need in prior.
Oh, I do. I know what you're talking about.
Like 20 different things, from like a strand of rope all the way to a canister of oxygen. And some of them are a little bit more, obviously oxygen would be number one. If you don't have the oxygen, you're dead in a second.
You're toast.
But some of the other ones the differences become a little bit more nuanced. And that's when you see the team come together, and the strengths of each one, a different type of strengths, obviously not the type of strength you're talking about, but their knowledge base differs depending on where their backgrounds are, what their education is, and they all bring different knowledge. And as they work together as a team, they make decisions that are different than they would have had they done it themselves. And you start out where you give the test to them by themselves, and then you progressively get to a larger group, and then you evaluate the results. And inevitably, always the larger team with the more diverse perspectives wins.
Yeah, because you're building a respect and appreciation for difference, for a different way of seeing things, and that's hard to expect from people without a little nudge. Yeah,
but it's not easy. I mean, I think right now in this cultural moment, there's a lot of expectation that people can just flip a dial, and especially people who are not in more diverse environments. I live in San Francisco, so we kind of take a lot of diversity just for granted. But if you're not in a very diverse crowd, it's harder to see how that can be an advantage. It all seems like it's all differences versus diversity, which I guess is this different spin on the same concept. So that leads us kind of the question we were talking about, or the question that we were talking about a little bit before, because we're both parents of biracial kids, and I just did a workshop on this with white dads of biracial kids.
Oh, cool.
All around blind spots. I mean, I don't think any one of us can pretend that we're going to solve everything, but when it's our own kids, it's a different subject. So I'm interested in your perspective, or what you're doing. I think this is going to be like a work in progress for me. My kids are half Korean American, and I don't see them every day as different than me. I just see them as my kids. But that means that I'm not maybe as attuned as I would be if they were exactly like me. I'm not as attuned to their Asian background, the importance of their Asian background, whether it's important to them, whether it will be important to them, whether they feel bullied or anything for anything that I might think is just a goofy joke. And my God, our criteria for what is considered, a bad joke has definitely changed.
Yeah.
So how do you do that with your kids?
Oh, well, I mean, it's hard. I will tell you, it is hard. It's definitely something you figure out through experience. Hopefully also through education. That's kind of been my approach. Just as a little background, we had 2 biological kids. My wife and I are both Caucasian. And then we couldn't have any more after our second, but we wanted more kids. So we looked into adoption, and we couldn't tell you why, but from the very beginning, we both wanted to be a mixed race family. We thought that it was the right thing to do. It bothered us, the kind of I don't know, the polarity that we were seeing in the world, and the kind of I'm not thinking of the word that's coming to mind, but the contention that we saw between races. And we thought, man, maybe if our family could be a visual expression of harmony and unity of races, then maybe that's something we can offer the world, since we're going to adopt anyway. And so we adopted a 4-day-old African-American girl. And she is such a light in my life. I would not have it any other way than having adopted my daughter. And she's 5 now, almost 6. She'll be 6 this year. And especially over the last year, there have just been some eye-opening experiences as I've taken her perspective. Like, what would 2020 have been like for her if she were 18 or 19 or 22? And even just taking that perspective when I don't think I would have had the motivation to otherwise was enlightening to me. So I started reaching out to colleagues and friends who are African-American, and all last year, I had regular meetings with friends and just asked them about their background. Like, tell me what it was like growing up Black in America. And one of my colleagues was around in the 50s. He told me about what it was like then, and I just couldn't help but shake my head. I could not believe what what it was like for him growing up, just even in elementary school and high school during that time. And you made a comment, or you mentioned open-mindedness before we started recording. And I think that's really where my growth has come from, is just being open-minded to the idea that there is racism going on in the world, especially in America right now, that my daughter, who's African-American, is going to experience things in her life that I would never have experienced in mine. Right. And that I've got to be open-minded to what that's going to be like for her, and continue to learn for myself what the experience is like for minorities in America, not just African-Americans, but all minorities. So I think open-mindedness has been my go-to strategy, I guess, especially since the beginning of 2020.
Yeah, it's not easy, and there's certainly so much hate going on that even the words that we use to describe these situations in a safe environment or a public environment like this are fraught with so much meaning and so much opportunity for interpretation, for negative interpretation, like two white guys talking about biracial kids, what right do they have, versus more power to you for trying to understand it better, to understand your daughter, as I'm trying to understand my own kids. And that's the only way we're going to get to a better place, is by trying to have these conversations, even though they can be difficult, and trying to find that empathy.
Yeah, but we got to talk about it. So here we are doing our best.
Yep, we're doing our best. All we can do. Well, Micah, it's really been a pleasure talking to you today.
Yeah, you too,
and
Paul.
Learning about the strengths assessment. That's not been my background, but I've got to say I'm a lot more curious as to how it can be used in a family setting like that, especially around kids, and I imagine with your spouse as well. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I encourage anybody, I know this isn't one of those assessments that's free. Gallup does charge to take it. So I know people can be hesitant to take it, but especially with coaching and with some, even just time without a coach dedicating to reading and understanding it, I have no doubt it can be a useful parenting tool, in addition to other parenting tools that we're learning about every day, and as we try to be better dads and better parents.
Yep. And at this point, I would usually send people to your website, but it's a really long URL. So I'll put that in the show notes, both for the podcast and the YouTube versions of this, so people can find you online.
Sounds good. I actually just updated my website. So now it's just my first and last name.com. So MicahLorenc.com. It's easy now.
It's easy now with a first name and a last name that are not exactly easy.
Yeah, exactly. That's true.
MicahLorenc.com.
Yeah, good point. Good. Put it in the show notes, Paul. Good point.
All right. This is Paul Baines of GreatDad.com. My guest, Micah Lorenc. If you're interested in our coaching services for new and older dads, you can find Micah in the show notes, and you can find me at GreatDad.com and GreatDad.com/coaching. See you next week. Bye.